They say every legend starts with a story, but some end with a scream. This is the tale of Eli Parks, a man whose passion for folklore led him down a path from which he would never return. Eli was a true believer in the strange and the unexplained. He hosted a small but dedicated podcast, Forgotten Echoes, where he'd spend hours dissecting American folklore, from the shadowy corners of witch trials to the whispered sightings of creatures that defy explanation. His listeners were a tight-knit community, sharing tips and obscure legends. It was all a bit of fun, a hobby that let him explore the mysteries hidden in plain sight. Until one day, the mystery came to him. It arrived in a plain, padded envelope, postmarked from a town he'd never heard of. Inside, there was no letter, no note, just a dusty, old cassette tape. The label was handwritten in faded black ink, the letters shaky, as if written in a hurry. It read, Bell Hollow -1979. Do not play at night. For anyone else, that warning might have been enough. A clear, stark command to leave it alone. But for Eli, it was a challenge, a dare. His mind raced with possibilities. Was this a genuine piece of evidence from some forgotten case? A recording of a paranormal event? Or just an elaborate prank from a devoted fan? The label itself was a hook, a perfect opening for his next episode. Do not play at night. It was almost cinematic. He chuckled to himself. The more he thought about it, the more the warning felt like an invitation. Caution was a luxury he couldn't afford when a good story was on the line. Curiosity was his compass, and it was pointing straight into the dark. That evening, as the city outside his window fell quiet and the streetlights cast long, skeletal shadows across his apartment walls, Eli sat down in his recording studio. The room was his sanctuary, filled with microphones, soundboards, and shelves overflowing with books on mythology and the occult. He held the tape in his hand, feeling the brittle plastic. It felt ancient, heavy with unspoken history. He decided he would record his reaction live to capture the raw, unfiltered experience for his podcast. His listeners would love it. He slotted the cassette into his old player, a vintage deck he kept for just such occasions. He took a deep breath, hit record on his own equipment, and then, with a sense of theatrical flair, he pressed the play button. The first sound was a familiar hiss of old magnetic tape. Static filled his headphones, a sound like a distant, empty ocean. He waited. Then, through the crackle, a voice emerged. It was faint, a mere whisper, and it sent an immediate, icy shiver down his spine. It was a child's voice, soft and ethereal. It said, "He's still here." Just those 3 words. They hung in the air, loaded with a meaning he couldn't grasp. Before he could process it, the tape hissed loudly and the soundscape changed. He heard footsteps. They weren't hurried or frantic. They were slow, deliberate, with an unnerving dragging quality, like something heavy being pulled across a rough floor. The sound was incredibly clear, almost as if it were happening right outside his studio door. Then came another sound, a man's breathing. It was ragged, strained, the sound of someone either running for their life or in their final moments. And then came the scream. It was high-pitched, a raw, primal sound of pure terror that ripped through the static. It was so abrupt, so visceral, that Eli physically flinched, pulling his headphones away. The scream was cut short, silenced in an instant. The tape went quiet, returning to the gentle hiss of static. For a moment, Eli just sat there, his heart hammering against his ribs. Then, a nervous laugh escaped his lips. "Wow," he muttered to his microphone. That's some impressive sound design. It had to be a hoax. A very well-made one, but a hoax nonetheless. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to create this little piece of audio drama. The child's voice, the dragging footsteps, that blood-curdling scream. It was all classic horror movie stuff. He had to admit, They'd gotten him. He decided to play it again, to analyze the sounds more closely, to deconstruct the trick. He rewound the tape, the whirring of the spools echoing in the silent room. He pressed play again. The static returned. The child's whisper, "He's still here." The dragging footsteps, the ragged breathing. He braced himself for the scream, ready for it this time. But this time, it was different. The scream started just as before, high and piercing. But it didn't stop. It didn't get cut off. It continued, stretching on and on, a single agonized note of unending pain. And it was changing. The sound was growing louder, fuller, as if the source was moving. It felt like it was traveling, breaking free from the confines of the tape. It sounded less like a recording and more like it was live. It sounded closer. The scream seemed to be filling the room, vibrating through the floor, rattling the glasses on his desk. It was inside his headphones, but it was also outside of them, echoing from the corners of his apartment. A cold dread, far more real than the thrill he'd felt just moments before, began to seep into him. This wasn't a prank. His lights flickered once, twice, then went out, plunging the room into absolute darkness. The only light came from the small, glowing view meters on his recording deck, their needles jumping frantically in time with the unending scream. The tape kept spinning, a relentless engine of horror. Panic surged. He lunged for the player, his fingers fumbling in the dark for the eject button. He pushed it hard. Nothing. It was jammed. He pushed it again and again, his breath catching in his throat, but the cassette was locked in place. The scream finally subsided, replaced by the soft, insidious hiss of the tape. The silence that followed was somehow worse, thick with anticipation. And then, from the deepest shadow in the corner of his apartment, a voice whispered. It was the same child's voice from the recording, but it wasn't coming from his headphones anymore. It was in the room with him. Clear as day, it said, "Now you're part of the recording." The next morning, concerned neighbors called the police after hearing unsettling noises the night before, followed by a profound silence. The officers forced their way into Eli Park's apartment. They found his studio in perfect order, except for the darkness. The power was out on his floor. On his desk, the vintage cassette deck was still running. The tape was still spinning, the end of the reel flapping rhythmically against the plastic casing. An officer, curious, rewound it slightly and pressed play. He heard the static. He heard the dragging footsteps. He heard the ragged breathing of a man. But there was a new voice on it now, woven into the fabric of the old recording. It was a voice screaming in terror, a voice they would later identify from the podcast episodes left on the computer. It was Eli's, and somewhere, buried deep within the layers of static, you could almost hear a faint, childish whisper, as if welcoming its newest echo. The Bell holotape has never been found since that day. It disappeared from the evidence locker, leaving behind only a police report and a chilling question. They say every legend starts with a story, but for Eli Parks, his story became the legend. And somewhere out there, a dusty cassette tape is waiting, ready for someone else to ignore the warning, ready for someone else to press play. He didn't believe in curses until the lake started whispering his name. That's the story of Theo Martin, a folklore photographer with a knack for debunking local legends. He'd traveled the country, camera in hand, turning whispers of ghosts and ghouls into stunning, yet perfectly normal photographs. His mission was simple: expose the truth behind the tall tailies. When he stumbled upon the legend of Red Lake, he knew he'd found his next big project. Deep in the forgotten woods, this body of water was said to drink the souls of anyone who disrespected it. The local folklore was rich with warnings and eerie accounts. Theo was practically salivating. He imagined the YouTube title already. I spent a night at America's ZC, late ... And here's what really happened. Spoiler alert, usually nothing happened. He packed his best camera, a dozen lenses, a high-powered drone, and enough coffee to stay up all night. Driving into the nearest town, a sleepy village nestled at the edge of the sprawling forest, he stopped at a dusty old diner for a quick meal and to fish for information. The locals were wary. An old man with eyes as gray as the cloudy sky warned him, "That lake's got a memory, son. It remembers disrespect." A waitress refilling his coffee added, "Don't you dare take photos at sunset. That's when the water shows you what you truly are. It reflects your soul, not your face." Theo just smiled, thanking them for the local color. He scribbled their warnings down in his notebook, not as precautions, but as flavor text for his video intro. "Sounds perfect for a thumbnail," he chuckled to himself as he paid his bill and headed towards the infamous lake. He arrived just as the golden hour began. The scene was breathtakingly beautiful, almost unnaturally so. The water was still as glass, mirroring a sky painted in fiery shades of orange, pink, and deep purple. The name Red Lake suddenly made perfect sense. It was serene, peaceful, and not in the slightest bit menacing. Theo felt a familiar pang of disappointment. It was always just a pretty landscape. He set up his tripod on the muddy shore, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and pine. The locals' words echoed in his mind. "Don't take photos at sunset," he scoffed, aiming his lens directly at the sun's reflection as it kissed the horizon. This was the money shot. He pressed the shutter button, the click echoing in the profound silence. He glanced down at the small screen on his camera to check the shot, and he froze. The image on the display was wrong. Terribly wrong. The sunset was there, captured in all its vibrant glory. But his reflection, standing on the shore, it wasn't his. The figure in the photo was pale, its clothes soaked and clinging to its skin as if it had just crawled out of the depths. Its hair was plastered to its face, and its smile was a wide, unnatural grin. But the eyes were pits of absolute blackness. And from the water below it, shadowy hands were reaching up, trying to pull it down. Theo's heart hammered against his ribs. His hands trembled. This had to be a glitch. A long exposure artifact, a lens flare, anything logical. His rational mind scrambled for an explanation, but his gut screamed that something was deeply wrong. He frantically pressed the delete button, his thumb mashing the control until the screen confirmed the image was gone. He took a deep, shaky breath, trying to calm his nerves. He looked back at the lake. His own normal reflection stared back at him. For a moment, he felt a wave of relief. It was just a glitch. He'd been working too hard, letting the spooky stories get to him. But then, the reflection changed. It didn't move as he did. It slowly, deliberately looked up, its eyes meeting his, and it mouthed a word. He couldn't hear a sound, but he could read the lips perfectly. "Hello." Panic seized him. He stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet and landing hard in the mud. He scrambled away from the water's edge, his eyes locked on his doppelganger in the lake. It was still smiling, that terrible, wide smile. Then the water itself began to move, not with wind or current, but with purpose. Ripples spread from the center, slowly forming letters on the surface, like a giant liquid Ouija board. The letters spelled out a single chilling word: trade. Theo didn't need another invitation. He grabbed his gear, not even bothering to pack it properly, and sprinted back to his car. He threw everything in the back seat and sped away, the tires kicking up gravel as he peeled out of the forest. He didn't look back. That night, huddled in a cheap motel room miles away, he tried to make sense of it all. He needed to see the evidence, or the lack thereof. He plugged his camera's memory card into his laptop, his hands still shaking. File after file loaded onto the screen. Corrupted, corrupted, corrupted. Every single photo he took that evening was an unreadable mess of digital noise. all except one. The last file opened, and the image made the air in his lungs turn to ice. It was a perfect, crystal-clear photo of the lakeshore where he had been standing. The sunset was beautiful. The water was calm, but he wasn't in the picture. Where he had stood, there was another figure. It was the pale, wet thing from his camera screen. It was wearing his clothes, holding his camera, and smiling its awful, black-eyed smile directly at the viewer. It was him, but it wasn't him. The trade had been made. The next morning, a family of tourists out for an early morning hike found something odd floating by the shore of Red Lake. It was a professional-grade camera, somehow still functioning. Curious, they pulled it from the water and checked the last image stored on its memory card. It was a photo of the lake, postcard perfect under the rising sun. But in the water's reflection, a man's face stared back at them. He was smiling. The locals in the nearby town have a new addition to their legend now. They say that Theo Martin never really left Red Lake. He's part of it. And if you go there at just the right time, and you're brave enough to take a picture of your own reflection, you might see something strange. Sometimes, if you look very closely, you'll see two reflections looking back at you from the water. Yours and his. So, what do you think? Was it a curse, a paranormal entity, or something else entirely? Let me know your theories down in the comments. He thought legends were carved from lies, until he found the hill where the bones still whispered. Miles Rourke was the kind of travel vlogger who built his brand on debunking myths. He'd visited haunted castles, cursed forests, and forgotten crypts, always finding a rational explanation, a clever trick of the light, or a story twisted by time. For Miles, ghosts, curses, and monsters were just good marketing for forgotten towns. His subscribers loved his confident, no-nonsense approach, but his next destination was different. It wasn't a famous tourist trap. It was a quiet, almost forgotten village nestled deep in the mountains, a place that didn't seem to want visitors. Here, he heard whispers of the Bone Carver's Hill. It wasn't a legend told to tourists. It was a warning shared in hushed tones among the locals. The folklore spoke of an outcast sculptor from centuries ago. Shunned by the village for his macabre art, he retreated to a lonely hill where he continued his work. Not with wood or stone, but with human bone. The source of his materials was a secret no one dared to uncover. When he finally died, the terrified villagers didn't give him a proper burial. They dragged his body and all his grotesque creations deep into the earth of his hill, hoping to bury the evil with him. The elders warned Miles with genuine fear in their eyes. Never go to that hill after dusk. The story goes that if you hear the sound of carving carried on the wind, it means the hill is restless, and it isn't done collecting bones. Miles, of course, just saw great content. He grinned at his camera, the skepticism clear on his face. An outcast artist, bone sculptures, and a spooky hill? Sounds like the perfect recipe for a local legend. Let's see what's really hiding in Bone Carver's Hill. He planned his trip for maximum dramatic effect, setting off just as the sun began to dip below the mountain peaks, casting long, eerie shadows across the valley. The hike up was steep, the path barely visible. The forest grew unnaturally silent as he ascended, the only sound being the crunch of his boots on dead leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. He kept his camera rolling, narrating his every thought. "Total silence up here," he said, his voice a little breathless. The villagers really sold the atmosphere. I'll give them that. But so far, no ghostly carving sounds. Just trees. He reached the summit as the last sliver of sunlight vanished. The hilltop was a bleak, open space, starkly different from the dense forest below. It was just a large, unnatural-looking mound of earth, dotted with crude wooden crosses leaning at odd angles, their forms like skeletal fingers clawing at the twilight sky. The air was cold, and a strange stillness had settled over the place. And then he heard it. At first, it was so faint, he thought it was the wind or an insect. A rhythmic scraping. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Like a chisel on a hard surface. It wasn't the wind. It was methodical, intentional. His vlogger bravado wavered for just a second. "Okay," he whispered to the camera. "I'm hearing something. It's probably just a branch rubbing against a rock, but it's weird." Curiosity, the very thing that made him famous, pulled him forward. He followed the sound, which seemed to come from the very center of the mound. The scraping grew a little louder, more distinct. It sounded exactly like someone carving. He scanned the area, his camera light cutting through the deepening dark. Nothing, no one, just the crosses and the dirt. Then his light caught something glinting in the soil. He knelt down, brushing away the loose earth. It was a small figure, no bigger than his hand, exquisitely carved from what looked like aged, yellowed ivory. But it wasn't ivory, it was bone. The figure was a person, their body twisted in an impossible pose, their face a mask of pure terror, frozen in a silent scream. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. As he looked closer, he saw more of them, dozens of them, half buried all over the mound. A gallery of bone statuettes, each one depicting a unique expression of horror and agony. Their tiny, hollow eyes seemed to watch him from the dirt. He reached out to film a particularly gruesome one, a small skeleton clawing at its own face. He carefully brushed the soil away from its tiny skull to get a better shot. That's when the skull twitched. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, but he saw it, a vibration that ran through the bone. His heart hammered against his ribs. Then a whisper, dry as dust and right behind his ear, rasped a single phrase, "Still working." He spun around, dropping his camera. There was no one there, absolutely no one. The clearing was empty, but the sound of carving wasn't faint anymore. It was loud, fast, and coming from all directions at once. Scrape, 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 scrape. It echoed around him, a cacophony of unseen tools on unseen bone. It felt like it was getting closer, tightening around him, a whirlwind of frantic, creative energy. The sound wasn't just in the air anymore. It was inside his head, a rhythmic pounding against his own skull. He scrambled for his camera, his rational mind completely shattered. This wasn't a legend. This was real. The next morning, a group of hikers found his camera lying on the path near the base of the hill. The battery was almost dead, but the memory card was full. The authorities reviewed the footage. The last file was chaotic and terrifying. It showed Miles screaming, his face pale with terror in the shaky camera light. He was trying to run, scrambling away from the mound, but something unseen was holding him back. He was dragged, kicking and screaming, his boots digging uselessly into the dirt, back toward the hill. The camera fell, its lens pointed up at his face. The final frame is a freeze frame of Miles Rourke. His eyes are wide and vacant. His mouth is open, but no sound is coming out. His face is completely still, drained of all life, his skin ashen and white as bone. The village is quieter now. The elders don't talk about Bone Carver's Hill anymore, but they listen. They say that now, when the wind blows just right through the valley at night, you can hear the scraping sound. Only it's different. It's no longer a single lonely artist at work. Now you can hear two chisels carving in the darkness. The bone carver has finally found his apprentice.